For her birthday, I want a trip to Turkey for $200,000. Otherwise, I will deregister you. What?
Honey, she cannot be serious.
The mother-in-law's birthday turned into a veritable ultimatum for the young family. The woman made a costly demand, a trip to Turkey worth 200,000 rubles, backed up by a serious threat of eviction from her own apartment. While the husband panicked and scrambled for a loan, his wife decided to take action and dialed a key person. Good afternoon, dear listeners. This is Andre Belli, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the channel Revelation of Daughters-in-Law. I present to you a new, interesting story. Enjoy listening. Ekaterina Yurievna Rizikova always considered herself the center of the universe. At 62, she continued to believe that the entire world revolved around her, and that those around her were obliged to fulfill her every whim. This was especially true for Maxim's son and his wife, Alla. Alla met Maxim 4 years ago at work. She found him kind and considerate, if a bit childish. Only after their wedding did she understand the roots of this childishness. His mother-in-law held her son in an iron grip, and the 35-year-old still asked his mother's permission for every step. The apartment had 3 rooms, but Ekaterina Yurievna generously gave the newlyweds one, constantly reminding them of her generosity. The remaining 2 rooms were considered her exclusive domain, with strictly restricted access. Alla worked as a manager in a construction company and as a Maxim programmer in a small firm. There was enough money for a modest life, but his mother-in-law demanded regular donations. She needed a new fur coat, expensive medications, or a bathroom renovation. Maxim meekly complied with his mother's demands, even when he had to borrow money from friends. Alla initially tried to protest, but her husband always sided with his mother. Trouble began back in March, when Ekaterina Yurievna announced she wanted a special birthday present. She hinted at a trip abroad, showed colorful brochures for Turkish hotels, and told her friends over the phone how her caring children were planning to surprise their beloved mother. Alla, however, was well aware of the family's financial situation, leaving practically no spare cash after paying for utilities, groceries, and other expenses. 200,000 rubles for a trip was out of the question. But Maxim stubbornly avoided a serious conversation with his mother, using generalities. The situation escalated at the end of May. Ekaterina Yurievna became increasingly insistent and capricious. She ostentatiously studied travel websites, called agencies, and inquired about prices for accommodation at the best hotels. At the same time, she reminded her son and daughter-in-law every day of their approaching birthdays. Alla tried to hint to her mother-in-law that such an expense was unthinkable, but she feigned ignorance. Maxim, meanwhile, simply hid behind a newspaper or left the house under any pretext. He was terrified of upsetting his mother, yet simultaneously understood the unrealistic nature of her demands. In early June, her mother-in-law resorted to open threats. She began saying that the apartment belonged to her, and that she had the right to decide who lived there. Ekaterina Yurievna hinted that the ungrateful children could end up homeless if they didn't appreciate her kindness. Alla felt the situation escalate with each passing day. His mother-in-law became increasingly aggressive. Maxim became increasingly withdrawn. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Ekaterina Yurievna stopped greeting her daughter-in-law, slammed doors demonstratively, and loudly talked on the phone about the greedy and heartless people surrounding her in her old age. The climax came a week before her mother-in-law's birthday. Alla was returning from work when she heard loud voices coming from the kitchen. Maxim was sitting at the table, looking guilty, and Ekaterina Yurievna was pacing the room, waving her arms. Her mother-in-law spoke of devoting her entire life to her son. She worked 3 jobs to raise him. Now she deserves a well-deserved rest and attention from her children. Ekaterina Yurievna declared that if the 200,000 ruble trip to Turkey wasn't paid for by her birthday, she would find a way to evict the ungrateful tenants from her apartment. Maxim tried to object, but his mother quickly cut him off. She reminded her son that the apartment was registered in her name, and legally, he was only a temporary resident. Ekaterina Yurievna added that she wouldn't have any trouble filing a lawsuit and proving that her son and daughter-in-law were interfering with her normal life. For her birthday, her mother-in-law demanded a 200,000 ruble trip to Turkey, threatening to evict them from her apartment. Maxim rushed to get a loan and Alla called someone. That person was Grigory Semyonovich, Maxim's father, who divorced Ekaterina Yurievna 15 years ago. Officially, he renounced all rights to the apartment in favor of his ex-wife. But Alla remembered one important detail from her husband's stories. Once upon a time, back in the 1990s, the apartment had been privatized in the name of both spouses. Grigory Semyonovich was a military man at the time, frequently traveling on business trips, and his wife signed many documents for him under power of attorney. After the divorce, he signed a waiver of his rights to the living space. But in the chaos of the time, some of the paperwork wasn't executed correctly. Alla met her former father-in-law at a cafe near his work. Grigory Semyonovich turned out to be a pleasant man of about 60, who bitterly recounted how his ex-wife had turned his son against his father. He admitted that he had dreamed of reconnecting with Maxim for many years, but Ekaterina Yurievna had done everything she could to prevent their meetings. It turned out that Alla's suspicions were confirmed. The apartment documents did indeed contain inaccuracies related to the privatization process. Grigory Semyonovich never filed a lawsuit, not wanting to cause any trouble for his former family. But now, having learned how Ekaterina Yurievna was blackmailing her son and daughter-in-law, he was ready to reconsider his position. While Maxim was running around banks looking for a loan, Alla was studying the legal intricacies with Grigory Semyonovich. It turned out that the man had perfectly legal grounds for restoring his rights to part of the living space. Moreover, Ekaterina Yurievna couldn't simply deregister her son from the apartment where he had been registered for many years. On her mother-in-law's birthday, a small group had gathered in the apartment. Several of Ekaterina Yurievna's friends, her neighbor Aunt Nina, and her niece Svetlana. The birthday girl was wearing a new dress and was clearly expecting the main gift. Maxim looked exhausted. He'd managed to get approved for a loan, but the terms, as Sakugo called them, were extortionate. 200,000 rubles at 30% interest meant the family would be living on the edge for the next 3 years, not having to pay the bank the majority of their salary. Ekaterina Yurievna accepted the congratulations with a satisfied expression, glancing at her son every now and then. She clearly reveled in her power over the adults. Her friends admired her youth and nakedness, while her mother-in-law coquettishly waved them off, saying that the most important thing in life was the love of loved ones. After the cake and traditional speeches, it was time to present the gifts. Ekaterina Yurievna eagerly unwrapped the packages, but her gaze wandered to the envelope containing the voucher. Maxim nervously crumpled the bank documents in his hands, gathering his courage to make the announcement. That moment the doorbell rang. Grigory Semyonovich stood there with a bouquet of flowers and a small box. Ekaterina Yurievna's face turned pale, and the guests stared in fascination at the unexpected visitor. The ex-husband gallantly congratulated the birthday girl, presented her with a gift, and asked permission to speak with his ex-wife alone. Ekaterina Yurievna tried to object, but the guests were already showing an unhealthy curiosity about the unfolding drama. Grigory Semyonovich explained the situation simply and clearly. He had learned that his ex-wife was blackmailing their son with threats of eviction. As a decent man and loving father, he couldn't allow this. Therefore, the following morning, he would file documents with the court to restore his rights to half of the apartment. The man then calmly explained the legal subtleties to those present. Ekaterina Yurievna indeed cannot deregister her son, who has been registered there since birth. However, Grigory Semyonovich, having restored his rights, will be able to register his new family in the apartment. His wife and 2 school-aged children will be happy to move into spacious housing. The mother-in-law tried to object, but her ex-husband pulled out a folder of documents. It contained copies of all the papers from the privatization period, legal opinions, and archival certificates. Grigory Semyonovich had prepared thoroughly for this conversation. He offered Ekaterina Yurievna two possible scenarios. First, filing a lawsuit with all the ensuing consequences. The second option was a peaceful resolution with mutual concessions. In any case, the threats against the son and daughter-in-law must cease immediately. The guests left completely bewildered. The birthday party had clearly not gone well. The birthday girl looked depressed, and family secrets had surfaced in the most inappropriate way. Ekaterina Yurievna locked herself in her room, refusing to continue the celebration. Maxim spoke to his father for the first time in many years. The men sat in the kitchen for a long time, discussing the past and the future. Grigory Semyonovich told his son his version of the divorce and explained the reasons for his prolonged absence from his life. Many things fell into place. For the next few days, an oppressive silence reigned in the apartment. Ekaterina Yurievna rarely left her room, occasionally appearing in the kitchen for food. She no longer demanded a voucher, didn't cause a scene or threaten evictions. Her mother-in-law was clearly considering the new situation and the possible scenarios. Maxim declined the loan, explaining his changed circumstances to the bank employees. Alla was relieved to realize that financial disaster had passed their family by. Moreover, for the first time, she saw her husband as decisive and independent of his mother's influence. A week later, Ekaterina Yurievna requested a meeting with Grigory Semyonovich. The former spouses had a long conversation, which resulted in a compromise. The woman acknowledged her mistakes and agreed to a peaceful resolution of the family dispute. The terms of the agreement were fair to all parties. Ekaterina Yurievna retained the right to 2 rooms and was able to live peacefully in the apartment for the rest of her life. Maxim and his wife received guarantees that no one would evict them. Grigory Semyonovich waived legal action in exchange for regular access to his son. His mother-in-law gradually came to terms with the new rules of the game. She no longer demanded expensive gifts, threw tantrums, or blackmailed the household. Ekaterina Yurievna even began to communicate with her daughter-in-law more or less politely, although their relationship was hardly warm. Her mother-in-law never went to Turkey. Instead, she spent her vacation at a friend's dacha in the Moscow region. Judging by the photos on social media, the vacation was no less successful than any trip abroad. Maxim re-established his relationship with his father. The men began meeting regularly, going fishing together, discussing work and life plans. Grigory Semyonovich proved to be a wise and engaging conversationalist, who helped his son rethink many aspects of his life. A year after that memorable birthday, Alla gave birth to a daughter. Ekaterina Yurievna became a caring grandmother who happily babysat her granddaughter. The birth of a child finally smoothed over the rough edges in their family relationship. 2 years later, the family moved into their own apartment. Maxim received a promotion at work, the family's income increased, and they were able to take out a mortgage on a 2-bedroom apartment in a new neighborhood. Ekaterina Yurievna remained in the old apartment but regularly visited the children. The mother-in-law never again tried to blackmail her relatives or demand the impossible. She realized that the respect and love of loved ones can't be bought with threats and manipulation. However, they can be lost forever by overstepping certain boundaries. Grigory Semyonovich became a full-fledged grandfather to his granddaughter. He often took the girl to his place on weekends, took her to the zoo and the circus, and read her bedtime stories. Maxim was grateful to his father not only for his help in a difficult situation but also for the opportunity to restore family ties. Alla sometimes recalled that tense period and was amazed at how quickly everything had changed. One phone call had shattered the system of family blackmail that could have plagued their lives for many years to come. She was grateful to fate for taking that step. Family relationships became healthier and more honest. Each family member knew their rights and responsibilities. No one overstepped their bounds. Ekaterina Yurievna learned to ask rather than demand. Maxim gained independence. Alla felt like a full-fledged member of the family.